My name is Sharnice Peters, and I am a program analyst for the Office of Community Services, Division of Energy Assistance. On behalf of OCS, I would like to welcome you to today's webinar, providing training for the fiscal year 2020 performance data form, focusing on an overview and reminders for the Module 2, for Module 2 and the Performance Measures module. Today's webinar will be presented by Melissa Torgerson of Verb Associates and Dan Bouch from Apprise. Today's webinar has four purposes. First, the webinar will provide a brief overview of Module 2 and what grantees are required to report. Second, it will explain the key concepts that will assist grantees in correctly completing the report. Third, the webinar will provide guidance on reporting households served with CARES Act funds. Finally, this webinar will review some general reminders. Today's webinar is the first of two webinars on performance measures. The audience for today's webinar is LIHEAP State and Territory Coordinators and other staff members who have completed the performance measures in the past. The next webinar will focus on a more detailed review for newer staff or those who want a line-by-line review. We appreciate your time today and for joining us with limited notice. We hope this is helpful as you prepare to complete your report. And with that, I'll turn it over to Melissa.
Thanks, Sharnice. Happy New Year, everyone. We're excited to have you with us today. Today's webinar is the shorter of the two performance measures webinars. It will be about 30 minutes long and we'll be reviewing key information. The slides and some other resources are available for download now in the handout section in your GoToWebinar sidebar. And the webinar is being recorded today and will be published on the ACF YouTube channel. If you have a question during the webinar, you're encouraged to type them into the GoToWebinar Question Box. And we have a picture here where you can find that. Submitted questions will be reviewed and responded to at the end of the webinar or via an email from Apprise. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Before we talk about the performance measures, we wanted to give you an update on the other FY20 reports. As many of you know, or all of you know, there were a few reports that were due at the end of December, the FY20 household report with final data, the carryover reallotment report with final data, and your 425 federal financial reports. There was an issue in OLDC last week that many of you reached out to your liaison or to us about that was stopping the ability to submit those reports. And that issue has been fixed, and you should have received emails from Jorge alerting you that you could go in and proceed with making any edits and submitting your final reports. If you're still facing any issues with that process, please reach out to your liaison or reach out to us for assistance. Okay, so this webinar is focused on the FY20 performance data form. And you may have noticed we're focusing on Module 2 before we've done any webinars on Module 1, the grantee survey. That's because as a result of OCS issuing the LIHEAP CARES Act funds, OCS is requesting changes and updates to the Module 1 portion of the performance data form. Those changes will be to include additional lines to report about how you used your CARES funds during fiscal year 2020. So once those changes are implemented in OLDC, OCS will be issuing an action transmittal with the final due date and instructions for the form. And at that time, we will be scheduling the training webinars for Module 1 to go over the CARES requirements. So we're beginning with Module 2. And if you go to the next slide, Jorge. As a reminder, Module 2 is the performance measures. States have been reporting those since 2016, and they provide measurable information on your annual LIHEAP impacts and your targeting performance. That includes how you are targeting your LIHEAP benefits to households, energy burden impacts of the assistance that you provide to your households, the number of occurrences where a LIHEAP benefit helped restore lost energy service, and the number of instances where a LIHEAP benefit helped prevent the imminent loss of energy service. So the data that you report in Module 2 provides you with information to help with performance management, and also provides that information to OCS to report to Congress and the public. Okay, so for FY20's performance measures for Module 2, there are no changes to the form or to the reporting requirements. So they are the same as in your prior FY 2019 Module 2 report. As you know, the CARES funds were issued during FY20, and many grantees have issued benefits at that time and have used them. Some grantees did not and are going to be using those funds during the current federal fiscal year. But for the performance measures form, there are no new requirements. There are no separate CARES fields from your other existing fields. So although the action transmittal and instructions haven't been published yet, you can still access the instructions for the performance measures module from last year. The link is here, and the instructions remain applicable and remain the same for FY20. So it is important, even though there are no changes to the form and there's no new lines, to think about how you have used your LIHEAP CARES Act funds and how that may impact your performance measures report. So for the FY20 performance measure, grantees want to make sure to include all your households that received any federal LIHEAP assistance during FY20. That includes the households that you assisted with just your regular LIHEAP block grant funds, any households you assisted just with the LIHEAP CARES Act funds, or households that may have received both. You also want to make sure that you include your regular LIHEAP benefits, as well as any supplemental or distinct CARES funded benefits when you're calculating the total benefit amounts and when you're calculating the average benefit amounts that get reported in Module 2. So there's no new CARES lines, but you want to include households that got assisted with CARES funds and include those benefits as you're completing your FY20 report. Now, you may see changes in your FY20 performance measures results because of how you use the LIHEAP CARES funds or because of the impact of the pandemic. So your FY20 report may appear substantially or somewhat different from your FY19 or your prior year reports. So here are some examples. If you provided extra benefits to a large portion of your clients, for example, you issued supplemental benefits with your CARES funds to your heating assistance recipients, then the average benefit amount that you report in Section 5 of Module 2 will be higher than it has been in prior years. If you targeted your CARES funds to provide additional or new benefits for crisis situations, then you may see a larger number of restoration or prevention occurrences. And if you served more households than you do during a normal fiscal year, you could see other differences in the characteristics of households served, like the average income levels or the number by main heating type. When we think about the pandemic in general, you may also see impacts in your report. For example, if you have shutoff moratoriums in your state that took place or that may still be taking place, you may see changes compared to prior years in the number of occurrences where LIHEAP restored lost energy service. And you could also see other changes in the LIHEAP recipient population that was served during fiscal year 2020. The average annual income amounts may be different, or the average energy bills may be different because of the economic and social impacts of COVID. Now we're going to move on to look at the reporting rules for Module 2.
So these are really high-level rules that we're going to go over for the energy burden and the prevention and restoration sections. And so most of you should be familiar with these. If you're not, we're going to provide resources at the end so you can brush up a little bit. But grantees should start in Section 5, the energy burden targeting section, by identifying all households provided with bill payment assistance in FY 2020. And this is the same data that is in Section 1, line 14 of the household report you should have just completed, only you're going to be breaking it out by fuel type on line A of this Module 2 report. For all of those households that got bill payment assistance, and as Dan said, that includes CARES in some cases, you're going to identify the top energy vendors used by these clients. And for those of you who've been around a while, you know this is the top 5 electric, the top 5 natural gas, and the top 10 propane, oil, or other fuel vendors. And so if you, we found in most states that if you use those numbers as targets, that you end up covering the majority of those households that you report in line A. For those households that use those top energy vendors, you're going to collect annual main heating fuel bill information and electricity bill information. For all households that you end up getting main electric and electricity data for a full year for, you're going to move those households down to Part B of Module 2, and you're going to calculate all the statistics in Part B for them. Then what you're going to do is as part of your data statistic calculations in Part B, you're going to identify those households who have main heating fuel and electric data and who have the highest energy burden. Those 25% of households that have the highest energy burden are going to then be moved down into Part C. And so you're starting with a big bunch of households, you're moving some of them down to Part B, and then you're moving some of them down to Part C. And Dan's going to talk a little bit more about how to calculate energy burden and get those statistics or get those people to move down into Part C. When you get to sections 6 and 7, which are restoration and prevention, things start to look a little different. First of all, you're going to count weatherization households in here. So for this section, you're going to use all the households that were provided with any type of LIHEAP assistance in FY 2020. And this is also reported in your household report on Section 1, line 11. You're going to take all of those households and you're going to identify those that who had energy service restored as a result of receiving assistance. Now, these are people who may have come in with a disconnect, who'd already been disconnected, who were already out of a deliverable fuel, or who had equipment that was no longer operable. And so those folks are going to be counted in this section. They're going to be counted based on the fuel type where the benefit was applied, not their main heating fuel type. So if you fixed an electric furnace, for example, that was inoperable, it's going to be counted under the electric column. If you restored electric service, even though natural gas is their main heat, it's still going to be reported under the electric column because that's where the benefit was applied. So that's a key difference between the previous section and these two. You're also not going to use an unduplicated count. So we know that people may come in for a heating benefit and a cooling benefit and a supplemental benefit and a crisis benefit. And in each of the 4 of those situations, they may be coming in with a disconnect notice, or they may be coming in already, hopefully not, disconnected. And so you're going to count each of those occurrences, not just the household. So this is not a place where you need to focus on unduplicated counts. You're going to do the same thing in the prevention section, only you're going to count those households who aren't yet disconnected or out of fuel, but are at imminent risk of being so. And so in some states, this means that they have a disconnect notice or a past due notice on their utility. They are at 25% of their deliverable fuel, their tanks at 25%. States define it different ways. Or that their equipment is about to kick the bucket. It's still working, but an auditor went out and said this isn't going to last through the year. We need to get this replaced before it dies. And so this is where you would count those households where LIHEAP prevented loss of energy for people who are at imminent risk of losing it. And now we'll go to general reporting reminders.
Okay, so the first reminder is about calculating the weighted averages in Section 5 of Module 2. And I want to remind you and encourage you that in the handouts bar on the side of your screen, there's a spreadsheet, and that is the spreadsheet for Module 2. It looks like what you'll see in OLDC, but it also may be helpful to look at that while we're going through these reminders. For Section 5, for the energy burden section, you have to report information for your households by fuel type. So you report information on the average income and average benefit amounts for electric main heat households, same thing for natural gas main heat, same thing for each deliverable fuel type you may have in your state. You also need to report the average amounts for all households, regardless of main heating type. Now, because the number of households with each main fuel type is different, you can't just average the 4 or 5 values that you report in the other columns of Module 2. You need to do a weighted average across all households. There's 2 main ways that you can do this. The first way is that Excel form that's in the handouts. You'll see fields that say auto-calculated. If you enter your amounts for each fuel type in that spreadsheet, it'll calculate the correct values for the all households column that's all the way on the left in Section 5 of Module 2. So that's one option. A second option is that you or your IT staff or contractor can calculate the all households values directly just by using the full complete data set of your households that you have energy bill information for and calculating those averages. If you have any questions about this or need more information, you can reach out to us and we'll be happy to help you.
So one thing that we're seeing out in the field a lot is that when it gets time to report restoration and prevention occurrences, people are looking only at their crisis assistance households. However, these numbers really should reflect all types of LIHEAP assistance, whether it's crisis or not, where a benefit restored lost energy service or prevented the loss of service. So in many of your states, or territories, you're going to find that a regular benefit can meet the need of someone who has a disconnect notice or maybe even someone who is already disconnected. And so that household should be counted in the restoration and prevention sections, even if it wasn't a crisis benefit that resolved the issue. And I mentioned this earlier, but it bears repeating. A household may have lost energy service or had energy service loss prevented more than once during a year. And so in that case, you should report each occurrence rather than counting a household only once.
The third reminder is how to identify your high burden households when you're completing Section 5. So Section 5 has 2 main sections where you're going to be reporting statistics on your households with energy bill data that you collected from your vendors. The first is Part B. That's where you report information for all households where you collected energy bill data. And then there's Part C, which is the top 25% of households from Part B with the highest energy burden values. As you can see in the graphic on this slide, Part C is a subset of the households you're reporting in Part B. So you produce all the statistics for all the households in Part B, then you filter down to just the top 25%, and you produce the same statistics again for just those top 25%. So there's a 5-step process on how you can identify these households. Step 1 is that for each household in Part B, you want to calculate their total residential energy bill. That's the sum of the annual main heating bill and the sum of their annual electricity bill. So if a household uses natural gas for their heating, you would add their annual natural gas bill with their annual electricity bill to get their total residential energy bill. If their main heat is electricity, then you'll only have one value and you would use that value. The second step is you want to calculate that household's energy burden. Energy burden is calculated by taking that total residential energy bill, dividing it by the household's annual income, and multiplying it by 100. As a reminder, if you collect income on your application for a quarterly period or a monthly period or some other variation, you'll want to convert that to an annual amount when you calculate the energy burden. The third step is if you have any households where the energy burden percentage exceeds 100%, because they're a zero income household or for other reasons, then you're going to want to assign them a value of 100% energy burden. Step 4 is once you've done the prior steps, you would sort your data set so that households are in order from highest to lowest calculated energy burden. Then you can identify the top 25% of households with the highest energy burden. And when you do that, you don't want to do it by fuel type. You just want to do it overall for all your households. Just to be clear, this doesn't mean households need to have an energy burden that's 25% or greater. It just means if you have, for example, 1,000 households, you would take the top 250, 25%. So here is a good picture that shows all these steps in one slide that you can reference to see how this was done. In the right-hand column are the energy burden values that are calculated for each step. And then in green are the top 25% that would be used to calculate the statistics for Part C. Now we're going to go to some final reminders and take questions.
So there are lots of resources for those of you who, once again, need to brush up or want to provide your IT or contract staff who may be helping you with these reports. The Check Before You Submit document is a great resource. It was created to help grantees with checking your Section 5 data prior to submission. There's a link here. It's also available in the handouts. After you submit your data, a prize will be checking it after you've submitted it into OLDC, and they will email you to ask questions or alert you of any issues based on their review. When it's confirmed as complete, your liaison will accept it in OLDC. If you later identify a correction or a change is needed, you'll need to submit a revision in OLDC. The FY 2020 performance data form will be made available in OLDC once proposed changes to Module 1, the grantee survey, are finalized. And so at that time, the revised due date will also be announced. As Dan said earlier, there are no changes to Module 2 for FY 2020 reporting. So the sections that we all went over, there are no changes to reporting except that you're going to be counting CARES Act households in your calculations. The FY 2020 performance measures data fields are the same as used for the FY 2019 report, and even though you cannot enter them immediately into OLDC, we encourage you to prepare your reports now to be ready for submission when that becomes available. As some of you found out or already know based on some of the calls we got frantically last week, there is a process to entering this into OLDC, saving it, certifying it, and submitting it, and that can take some time. And so give yourself a nice amount of time to get all of that done and account for any glitches that may happen. There are some OLDC resources we've listed here, including the login to OLDC and some assistance phone numbers and emails. And so if you're having problems with the actual logging in or accessing certain fields, they're who you'd want to call. And we have lots of performance measures resources that, as Dan mentioned, the FY 2020 18 instructions aren't out yet, but you can access the 2019 18 instructions to help you with Module 2 of the performance data form. There are lots of resources and data reliability assessment tools on the performance measures website. There's also a data collection tool there that would help you figure out, for example, benefit and restoration measures, what counts as imminent risk, for example. We're getting that question a lot. The check before you submit document, which we mentioned, the link is here. And for those of you who may be newer to this and want just a frame of reference, you can go access your past year's performance measures data in the data warehouse at the LIHEAP Performance Management website, and the link is here. We are doing another training that'll be more detailed on January 19th, 3 p.m. Eastern. This will be 90 minutes, and we'll go through line by line, step by step of the performance measures section of the performance data form. Everyone is welcome to attend, even if you submitted before and you just want to brush up. Also, think about providing the link of this webinar to your IT staff if they're putting together this report, or your business analyst, or whoever you're using to put together this report. This would be a good one for them to sit in on to get details and have their questions answered. And once we have the proposed changes for CARES reporting for the Module 1, which is the grantee survey, we'll begin to schedule webinars shortly after that. There are lots of people here on this slide that you can reach out to if you need to get assistance. Your liaison should always be your first point of reference. Once again, if you're having issues with OLDC itself, we've included the help support desk email and phone numbers, and there's a bunch of us at Apprise that are willing to help, and if one of us can't, we'll get you to someone who can, and you're welcome to reach out at any time. And now we'll take questions.
Jorge, well, I'm going to ask you to put the poll up so people can answer the poll, and you can then ask us, read any questions you got, and we'll answer those while people are taking the poll. So if you could please answer this poll, that'll help us with preparing for the next webinars. How confident are you you understand how to correctly complete the FY20 performance measures? Any questions, Jorge?
Yes. The first question is, will the step-by-step overview meeting be recorded if we are unable to attend?
Yes. So we record all the webinars and they get put on the ACF YouTube channel, and we can send you the slides as well.
I see someone with a raised hand. If you want to type your question into the question box, I can read it out. So, Dan, we have another question. The question says, can we begin Section 2 prior to the OCS release of Section 1?
You're not going to be able to access it in OLDC because it's one report in OLDC with different modules. But yes, because the guidance isn't changing and because there's no changes to the form, you can prepare your report so that once it's available in OLDC, you'll just need to go in and enter it. And maybe one more question since we're at the end.
Okay, if we don't get to your question, because there are more than one questions, we'll respond on an email shortly after the webinar ends. But the last question we can get to is there a section of the performance management website where I could find additional reference material?
Yes, Jorge and I can send you the links to those sections. Well, we thank you so much for your time today, especially coming back from the holidays. We'll be having the next webinar on the 19th, and look forward if you attend that webinar. And please reach out to us if you have any issues as you're preparing your report. Thank you very much.